She didn't even blink when she did it. The white teller pinched the ID card between two perfect fingers, then dropped it. Not on the desk, not on a tray. She let it fall, hard and loud, onto the cold tile floor. The sound cracked through the silence like glass. Everyone in the upscale bank lobby heard it, but no one moved. No one spoke. A wealthy older man waiting near the investment lounge lowered his newspaper. A woman in heels at the other counter froze mid-signature. The soft piano music in the background kept playing like nothing had happened. But something had. Natalie didn't say a word. The black woman stood still, spine straight, eyes fixed on the ID lying near her feet, like it was something dirty. Her hands didn't shake. Her jaw didn't flinch. But her silence screamed louder than anything in that room. She slowly bent down, picked it up. The teller said nothing. Not sorry, not even oops. Just turned away, like Natalie was invisible. It wasn't just the fall of a card. It was the fall of respect, the fall of dignity. In that spotless, marble-floored bank in the heart of downtown America, surrounded by men in polished shoes and women in pearl earrings, a black woman's identity had been tossed like garbage, and nobody thought it was worth noticing. One man looked, then looked away quickly. A couple near the window whispered and avoided her eyes. Even the security guard by the door shifted uncomfortably, but stayed rooted to his spot. Natalie didn't ask why. She didn't make a scene. That's the part that stung the most. Not the racism. The expectation that she'd just take it. And maybe she would have. Maybe she would have walked out and swallowed the whole thing. But something in her eyes changed when she stood up. She didn't speak. She just looked at the teller. A long, deep stare. Calm. Controlled. But full of something sharp and dangerous. Like thunder just before it breaks. And in that moment, even the silence seemed to step back. Nobody knew who she was. But they were about to. The automatic doors had barely closed behind her when the temperature shift hit. Outside, the sun burned down on the streets of Raleigh. But inside Stratton Financial's downtown branch, it was cool, almost sterile. Everything gleamed. The marble floors, the silver fixtures, the oversized chandelier above the front desk. Piano music floated through the air, like they were trying to convince every customer they mattered. Natalie paused just past the entrance, adjusting the lapel of her navy blazer. Her clothes were modest but clean. Her heels were scuffed, but her presence was poised. She didn't come in loud. She didn't need to. She stepped forward, clutching a certified check and her ID in one hand. She'd done this 100 times. Deposits, verifications, signatures. Nothing unusual. At least, it shouldn't have been. The teller closest to her, a young blonde woman with perfect curls and a name tag that read Jessica, didn't look up. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like Natalie wasn't there. Seconds passed. Then more. Natalie waited. Still nothing. Finally, she offered a soft, "Hello." Her voice steady, polite. Jessica didn't even flinch. But the second a white man in a tailored suit stepped in behind Natalie, Jessica's whole demeanor changed. Her face lit up. She stood from her chair, practically beaming. "Good afternoon, Mr. Douglas," she said sweetly, her voice suddenly full of life. Natalie turned slightly, eyes tracking the scene with a calm she didn't feel. She said nothing, just waited. When Jessica finally turned back, her tone had cooled again. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked flatly, her eyes scanning Natalie up and down, resting briefly on her shoes, her purse. Natalie explained calmly that she didn't need a meeting, just a check deposit. No advice, no loan application, a simple transaction. Jessica sighed. "You'll need to go over there," she said, pointing vaguely toward a row of lanes behind them. Natalie nodded once and moved on. But her chest was tight. Because this wasn't the first time she'd been treated like she didn't belong in a place like this, and something told her it wouldn't be the last. The line moved slowly. Natalie reached the next counter and gently placed her documents on the smooth stone surface, a certified check, and her ID. She offered a polite nod to the teller behind the glass. It was Jessica again. Jessica walked over, her heels clicking like judgment. She picked up the ID with 2 fingers, pinched it like it was something sticky. She squinted at it, her lips pressed into a tight line. Then, without a word, she let it fall. The ID clattered on the floor and spun before settling near Natalie's shoe. A pause gripped the air. Someone at the back of the lobby gasped quietly. But nobody said a thing. Nobody moved. Natalie felt heat rush up her neck, but she kept her body still. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, then relaxed. She knelt down, picked up her ID, and stood again. Slower this time. Jessica didn't apologize. She didn't even look guilty. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "We've had problems," she said vaguely, her voice cold. "You understand? Big checks, unverified names, suspicious documents." Natalie looked her in the eye. "It's a certified check. You can verify it in your system." Jessica didn't budge. "Where's your company located? How long have you been running it? Do you have original registration papers? Are you sure this isn't some kind of fraud?" The words weren't curious. They were cruel. Thinly veiled suspicion wrapped in fake protocol. Natalie answered every question calmly. Her voice never cracked. But her hands clenched slightly behind the counter, hidden from view. Jessica leaned toward her colleague, Rachel, who'd been watching from the next window. "Looks fake to me," she whispered, loud enough for Natalie to hear. Rachel snorted. "Yeah, right. Probably another scam. They're getting smarter, though." Their laughter was soft, but cutting. Natalie didn't flinch. She slowly placed both hands on the counter and looked Jessica straight in the eyes. "I suggest you do your job. Verify it. Or call someone who can." Jessica blinked, just for a second. The room suddenly felt quieter. She took the check with a frown, walked off toward the back, muttering something about protocols. Natalie stood alone, her ID back in her hand. Her dignity bruised, but her expression unbroken. Around her, people pretended not to see. Eyes darted away. Guilt hovered in silence. But inside Natalie's chest, something was no longer quiet. She didn't say it out loud. But the look in her eyes said everything. "You're going to regret this." Natalie stepped out into the daylight, the glass doors of Stratton Financial closing behind her like the end of a bad chapter. But it wasn't over. She didn't rush to call anyone, didn't post a rant online, didn't explode. She walked 3 blocks in silence, her heels tapping rhythmically on the sidewalk like a countdown. 1 block past the bookstore, 2 blocks past the corner cafe. At the 3rd, she stopped. The building wasn't flashy. No giant logo, just a polished steel plaque. Coleman Construction Group. She stepped inside. The receptionist at the front desk looked up instantly. "Good afternoon, Miss Coleman." Natalie offered a small nod. "Hold my calls for the next 2 hours." She walked through the glass hallway toward her office, top floor, corner unit, the one with the skyline view, the one people fought to get into meetings for. Behind the closed door, she sat down slowly in her leather chair, reached for a file from the edge of her desk, and opened it. Inside was the signed contract, $2.3 billion. Her company, their bank, that branch. She let the numbers settle in her mind, not for validation, she knew who she was, but to remind herself what silence can cost the arrogant. Natalie wasn't here to humiliate anyone. She didn't want headlines, but she wasn't going to let this slide. She pulled out a copy of the deal confirmation, the one co-signed by Stratton Financial's regional VP himself. She printed an extra copy, then another. By the time she finished, there were 3 crisp files on her desk, each bearing the same signature, hers. She opened her drawer, took out her engraved business card, and tucked one into the front folder. The office stayed quiet, but her resolve wasn't. This wouldn't be a fight. It would be a reckoning. Not loud, not violent, just undeniable. She stood, smoothed her suit jacket, and placed the files neatly into a leather case. The next morning, she wouldn't need to speak loudly. She would walk in, hand over the truth, and let the walls collapse around the very people who thought she didn't belong. And they'd remember her, not by name, but by silence. The next morning, Stratton Financial looked exactly the same. Marble floors gleaming, coffee machines humming, front desk neatly arranged, but something shifted the second Natalie walked through those doors. This time, she didn't pause near the entrance. She walked with purpose, her black tailored suit catching the morning light, heels sharp against the floor. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, the kind of look you didn't question. Ashley, the receptionist who had ignored her the day before, looked up, then froze. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to greet her or pretend again. Natalie didn't wait. "I'd like to see Mr. Thomas Kent," she said calmly, placing her business card on the desk. "Now." Ashley's eyes dropped to the card, and for a brief second, her skin lost color. Natalie Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Construction Group. She stood up so fast her chair squeaked. "Oh, of course. One moment, ma'am." Moments later, the manager's door swung open. Thomas Kent stepped out, eyes locking on Natalie. His voice cracked before his words did. "Miss Coleman, I wasn't aware—" "I'm sure you weren't," she said, voice sharp but controlled. He gestured nervously toward his office. "Please, right this way." Inside, the lights were warm, the desk spotless. Natalie didn't sit. She placed the leather folder on the table and slid it across. "I believe this is yours," she said. Kent opened the file, his brow furrowed, then dropped. Inside were copies of the $2.3 billion partnership agreement, the one between Stratton Financial and Coleman Construction, the very project Kent's team was set to handle over the next 18 months. And Natalie was the woman behind it. He flipped to the signature page. His name was there. So was hers. She watched the color drain from his face. "I came yesterday, quietly. No special requests, no entourage, just a basic deposit." Kent swallowed hard. "Miss Coleman, I'm not here for an apology," she interrupted. Silence filled the room like fog. "I'm here to let you know," she continued, her voice like steel wrapped in silk, "that what happened yesterday was not a mistake. It was a culture. One I will not be part of." Kent looked like he might collapse into the leather chair behind him. Natalie turned, her voice steady. "You'll hear from my team by end of day. Whether this partnership continues is up to you. But my silence won't be part of the deal again." And with that, she walked out. No threats, no screams, just gravity. The moment Natalie stepped out of Thomas Kent's office, the bank shifted. Behind closed doors, whispers spread fast. Footsteps quickened. Phones rang off the hook. Security footage was pulled. Witnesses were called in. The board demanded answers. Jessica, the teller who had dropped Natalie's ID, found herself summoned to the leadership conference room. Her usual confident smirk was gone, replaced by a shaky uncertainty. The video played on the large screen. The plastic card hitting the floor echoed in the silent room. No one defended her actions. No one dared. Rachel, who had giggled alongside Jessica, sat stiff and pale as her own words were played back. Her dismissive laughter now sounded cruel, callous. Thomas Kent faced the harshest scrutiny of all. His failure to intervene, his indifference, his cold silence weighed heavily on him. Board members pressed for explanations he couldn't give. After tense hours, swift decisions were made. Jessica's dismissal was immediate. She left the bank without a word, her former arrogance replaced by regret. Rachel was suspended indefinitely and ordered to attend intensive diversity and anti-racism training. Locked away in a conference room, she absorbed harsh truths she had never considered before. Thomas Kent was demoted. Stripped of authority, he was reassigned to a low-profile administrative role far from the branch's daily operations. The receptionist, Ashley, whose cold indifference had greeted Natalie first, resigned quietly, overwhelmed by the storm of outrage that had engulfed the bank. Stratton Financial's leadership released an internal memo declaring zero tolerance for prejudice, no matter how small or unintended. Mandatory training programs were launched across every branch. Employees, from executives to new hires, learned to recognize unconscious bias and the importance of genuine respect. The bank was no longer just a building. It became a symbol of change, or a warning for those who resisted it. And all this unfolded quietly. There were no headlines, no public apologies. Just the silent collapse of a culture that thought it could ignore the dignity of a black woman. Meanwhile, Natalie's company severed ties. The $2.3 billion deal quietly dissolved without fanfare. Her quiet strength had forced a reckoning that words alone could never achieve. In the end, the loudest justice was the silence left behind, and the unshakable fact that she would never be invisible again. Weeks later, Natalie stood before a packed auditorium, the bright lights soft against her calm face. This was no victory speech, no accusation, no bitterness, just a question. Her voice carried clearly, every word deliberate, every pause measured. "How different would our world be," she asked, "if from the very first moment we met someone, we chose to trust them?" The room held its breath. Faces reflected awe, regret, hope. No one spoke, but the silence was full of meaning. Behind her sat Michael Andrews, the regional vice president who had once dismissed her. His eyes were fixed on her, filled with the weight of his mistakes. Thomas Kent and Jessica were there too, quietly listening. No shameful confrontation, no angry fingers pointed. Just a shared understanding. Natalie's story was no longer just about a tossed ID or a lost deal. It had become a symbol of resilience, of change, of the quiet power one woman had to shake a system built to ignore her. As she stepped down from the stage, Applause filled the hall, slow at first, then roaring, unstoppable. Letters and emails poured into her office in the days that followed. From young entrepreneurs of color, from community leaders, from those who had once been skeptical. Each message told the same story. They felt seen. They felt hopeful. Natalie smiled quietly at the words. She hadn't fought with anger. She had fought with dignity. And that dignity had sparked a movement. She looked out her office window at the city skyline. The sun was setting, and she knew her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every person who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or denied. It belonged to those still fighting, and it belonged to the change yet to come. Because trust, real trust, was the first step toward justice, and justice was only the beginning.